Welcome to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the film series with lively discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach cinema studies at the College of Staten Island of the City University of New York. Today we continue our five-part series, Classics of the American Silent Cinema. We'll be seeing our first full-fledged comedy, the 1924 production, The Marriage Circle, directed by Ernst Lubitsch. This film was a big hit in its day, both a popular success and a critical success. It put Lubitsch on his road to being one of the top comedy directors, perhaps of all time, in the American cinema, a career that spanned both the silent and the sound eras. We'll be talking about Lubitsch, American film comedy, and, of course, this film in particular, after today's screening. We have, as usual, two guests, Professor John Belton of Rutgers University and Professor Andrew Sarris of Columbia University. Enjoy The Marriage Circle. Yeah. Hi, welcome back to Cinema Then, Cinema Now. I hope you enjoyed The Marriage Circle, a delightful and rather complicated, intricate, sophisticated comedy. We'll be talking about a number of aspects of the film in just a minute, but let me take this moment to introduce to you today's two guests. Sitting to my left is Andrew Sarris, who many people know as a professor at Columbia University, but many other people know from his extensive writings. Andy is currently film critic for the New York Observer. Many people know a great deal about the American cinema because of his book, The American Cinema. And he's, at the moment, at work on a book called The American Sound Film, which we all look forward to seeing when it's published. Sitting to my right is Professor John Belton. John teaches at Rutgers University, is the author of a number of books on the history of cinema. He's currently completing a study of the uses of the widescreen in the American cinema, which should be a big book. No, I can't say that.
The format should be appropriate, I think.
Format should be absolutely appropriate. John's also the co-editor of an anthology about the uses of sound in the cinema. That's why, of course, I had you on a silent film
Thank you.
film show. Andy, I'd like to actually start with you and ask you just a sort of general question about Lubitsch. Lubitsch is someone who was extremely famous for a very long period of time. He's known by film admirers and buffs now, but somehow it's not a name as well known. So who was Lubitsch, and where does this film fit in with his career?
Well, Ernst Lubitsch was a very famous film director who was very famous from about the 20s, or the teens really, through the 40s, and he died in the mid-40s. So that's about 40 years ago.
Right.
You know, so he really exemplified a style and a vision of the world that's more than 40 years old. That was even dying when his career came to an end through death. I think he started out in Berlin. With a group of, he was one of the well-known Jewish comedians in that very pre-Holocaustal period, right after the First World War, or even during the war. In Berlin, he did a kind of Jewish buffoon character, but he became better known as the director. The acting after a while faded. He wasn't great actor or a great comedian, but he became a great director, and one of the characteristics of his style, and I think you saw it in evidence in The Marriage Circle, was his use of the frame of the film to create gags out of the very architecture of space, the way Marie Provost, sidles into the frame, or when they're in the cab, how she falls against him and leans against him. These are gags of movement that are based on the geometry of the picture frame, but also he also deals, and it's very significant that in 1925 in America, although it's supposed to be the beginning of the flapper period and everything else, we're still in the grip of the Victorian era as far as American movies are concerned, so that the action has to be set in Vienna, and people have to have foreign names there. So he's dealing with a world that he left behind when he left for Germany. Now he left in the early 20s. He left before the coming of sound. There were a great many German directors who followed him, but he was one of the first who came to this country. And what is interesting is that at Warner's, which was also the studio, as John reminded me before when we were talking, of Rin Tin Tin.
Let's keep everything in context.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of movies were very hick movies, small town movies.
Right.
America was still a small town country despite Prohibition and all that sort of thing. And Lubitsch represented a very cosmopolitan, a very sophisticated view of life and relationships and so forth. But also, it was a very precise society of manners. It's the gestures and the fetishes that he deals with, if you will, are very important. And this is one of the things I think that's very hard for modern audiences to understand, particularly nowadays when comedy is so broad, that it's the raising of an eyebrow, a wink, a closed door, the art of suggestion, of ellipsis, of understatement. Adolf Manju, for example, is the quintessential Lubitsch actor, the one who plays the husband in this film. He doesn't fly off the handle. He doesn't get to, he waits, he smiles, he plans. He's very, very methodical. That scene with the hats is a classic scene. It's a scene of perfect manners. They're both very gracious with each other, and yet the scene unfolds with this deliberate, inexorable slowness.
Well, it might be, you're talking about the distance of that from us. It might be we could even go even further back, that seems almost more like Restoration comedy.
It is.
Than it is to the sort of broad, physically based farce that.
Yeah, or the comedy of Molière, the comedy where although Molière is a little more robust in some ways, but there is always a sense that there is a proper way of doing things, and then you breach it, but in a very delicate and very subtle way. In other words, it's a society that has rules.
Right.
And of course, the ultimate Lubitsch comedy perhaps will come later in Jean Renoir's La Règle du Jeu, which is very much influenced by Lubitsch's cinema. And Lubitsch had a tremendous influence on a great many directors, and he in turn was influenced by some of his predecessors, particularly Chaplin in Woman of Paris.
Now, Woman of Paris, let's just remind people, is the Chaplin film that he directed. One, that he was not in, he directed, and two, that is a serious drama, does not have the Chaplin
it's very much a Victorian melodrama, but it has, again, Manju is in that too, and he's a very ironic character. And this is the big question. To this day, this question arises in movies in America. Can irony survive in America? You know? And it's had tough sledding all through the years, and it requires the greatest stylists like Lubitsch to bring it off.
Yeah. John, we were just talking about Lubitsch in his own style, but how do you see him in relationship to the other great comic directors of the 20s?
Well, one thing about the Marriage Circle, of course, is that it doesn't feature one of the major clowns, which dominated slapstick comedy, nor is it slapstick in itself, because as we just mentioned, it's more like a Restoration comedy. But one of the things that I think, as Andy's pointed out, Lubitsch has in common with Chaplin is his sense of space, kind of theatrical presentation. And one of the things he has in common with Keaton, who we'll be seeing shortly in Steamboat Bill Jr. in this series, is a sense, a really profound sense of kind of visual articulation, of making a cut to an object at a precise moment to deliver a gag, and creating a kind of humor that comes across visually, in which the titles, the intertitles, are really not containers of gags at all, but the comedy comes out of the characters and their relationship to one another, and the framing and the close-ups, so that you can say that there's a good deal of visual sophistication that Lubitsch introduces to American screen comedy, that that the silent clowns, as sort of centers of their own works, really did not have a vested interest in achieving. That is, a sophistication in telling a story,
right, in
providing a situation that itself was funny no matter who was in it. Monjou, of course, is a great deadpan comedian figure, as is Marie Provost, who plays his wife. But their parts could have been as funny with other actors in them, I think, because of the Lubitsch has created
It's interesting that, of course, you're talking about the fact that the two we think of most comedies, Keaton and Chaplin, with Lloyd and Harry Langdon as the sort of, second rank as the clowns. One of the things that's true, I think, of their films is that you can always, in the best sense, tell when it's a Keaton film or when it's a Chaplin film. No matter what the character is named in the particular story in a Keaton film, you know it's Keaton. You know there's a certain persona or whatever. With Lubitsch, you wouldn't say, you almost say there's a Lubitsch style of drama or story, that the actors may change, but what shows up is the Lubitsch sensibility, the director's sensibility, but also the kinds of stories and actions and style that he, finds most comfortable and brings into the American cinema, really.
Yeah, in that respect, Lubitsch does look forward, I think, a good deal to the kinds of comedies you find in the late 20s and early 30s, in which actors who were straight actors in other genres, like Cary Grant or something, enters into a kind of comic situation. The screwball comedy is what I'm thinking of, in which they perform like clowns, but they're essentially in a scripted universe that is very funny.
Yeah.
And that's why a Lubitsch film is a Lubitsch film, not a Monty Blue film or an Adolphe Menjou film, even though I think audiences at the time perhaps were more interested in performers. But this is the beginning of Lubitsch's career. Gradually, I think Lubitsch emerged as a figure who audiences realized possessed a comic vision, and that went beyond any one performer.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think some of the other features of that vision are, Andy? What do you think?
Well, one of the famous phrases that has been used, perhaps overused, and it's misleading. It's the title of Herman G. Weinberg's book, and Bill Paul has taken off after that title because it oversimplifies what Lubitsch. But an example is the so-called Lubitsch touch, and it runs all the way through the 20s into the 30s and to the 40s. An example of the Lubitsch touch, when Monty Blue tells Creighton Hale to go and console his wife, tells him, you're her, and he doesn't know that this guy is badly in love with his wife and is dying just for a glimpse of her, and it makes his whole day. And so he's sending this man who's really in love with his wife, he doesn't know it, in to console his wife, to be alone with her, perfect setup. And so you see Creighton Hale go inside, the door closes, and the camera just stays on the door. And you stay, and you stay, and you begin to wonder what's going on in there, of course, it's 25, perhaps not too much is going on. Obviously not everything is going on that goes on today in the first reel of movies today. But enough is going on that this guy is in ecstasy in seventh heaven. Obviously, he's been commissioned by the husband to it's almost a Molière scene, of the unconscious cuckold, sending his best friend in to advise his wife and so forth. So that's an example of a Lubitsch touch. You get the same thing in Ninotchka when Garbo when the three commissars are
Yes,
living
yeah.
it up, and you see these three cigarette girls go in, and you can hear from behind with sound. You can hear behind everybody going, "Whoa!" You know, but you hear it through closed doors. Now everybody said that is the Lubitsch touch, the idea of suggestion, and that is a part of it. It's understatement. It's not. It's not. I will say one thing though about space. Chaplin, Keaton, and Lloyd all use space for very subtle sight gags. So it wasn't the entire thing. But I think what is characteristic of Lubitsch, perhaps of the style, is the time that he gives, and I'm very glad that this print, whatever problems it may have otherwise, is screened at the proper speed.
Right.
So you get the slow reaction when the husband comes out of the office where he thinks the wife has been embracing the husband, and then he sees that the wife is sitting out there. There must be another woman in there. He doesn't immediately react. He's puzzled for a while, and then gradually he gets. That's Lubitsch. That's a sense where that people do not rush to judgment.
I mean, part of this Lubitsch style you talk about, the closed door style, could be described as a metaphorical style. That Lubitsch is constantly working with physical actors, but it's to establish a kind of metaphorical level of activity. And I think in Marriage Circle, it's very, very interesting because we have kind of two different groups of characters: the professor's Stock and his wife, and the Bronze, and there's an ability, I might say, of Lubitsch to use a metaphorical style, but also the characters themselves speak to one another through objects or through this metaphorical style.
Yeah, the
opening sequence.
The whole thing is the roses, the flowers dropped, you know, and the camera lingers on the flowers. You know, they're very important. I mean, this is a society where rituals, where signs are very important.
Yeah, Manjou's always kissing someone's hand. This is the society of manners. But what I'm thinking of is the close up of the sock with a hole in it at the beginning.
Yes.
This is the epitome of their marriage.
And it's
neglect.
also characteristic of silent comedy of this sophisticated kind, where you encapsulate everything very economically.
Right. But so these characters are the Manjou and Prevost anyway exist on a level of sophistication so that they can use these metaphors and signs with one another to actually have a discourse in that opening scene. Because he has his sock with a hole in it, and she goes over and opens a drawer, and it's full of socks. His drawer has no socks in it at all. And she wants to sit down on the chair. She takes his clothes off and throws them on the bed. And she wants to sit on the bed. She takes his clothes and throws them on the chair. And this is might say the symbol of their relationship is one of this kind of gags being thrown back and forth at one another. And they can pull it off. When you get to the other couple, the doctor and his wife, who are also bound up in this system of manners and metaphorical behavior, they're a little less in control of their own metaphors. I mean, they speak a good romantic comedy, but they don't have the level of wit that the Manjou and Provost have.
No, and there's also something a little smug about the Monty Blue character. There's a little. I was sitting with someone watching it, and she objected at the end to his smugness, you know, about the other man. That there's something unpleasant about that, and that's left dangling. That he really doesn't get his comeuppance. He lives in a state of false security. It's the double standard. Now, in a sense, therefore, this film is not completely liberated in the modern parlance, or enlightened in the modern parlance as far as the feminist certainly movement is concerned. But it's part of this rueful wisdom that he has, that husbands are foolish, they live in a fool's paradise. It's very much, it isn't liberating, but it isn't also it isn't also patriarchal. It's that husbands have to work at marriage; they can't just take it for granted. And I think the character who is dominant in the end is the wife. I mean, she, even though she's she's not aware of the husband's smugness, fully aware of it. At least she sort of dictates the final terms.
I see it a little bit differently. We were talking about this earlier, that it is a film set in Vienna, and all of this hanky-panky can go on because it's not taking place in America.
Thank God.
I think that the doctor who's in charge of nervous disorders, Dr. Freud here, Dr. Braun, is really, they're really an American couple. We identify with them as opposed to the otherworldly Professor Stock and his wife, who are much more European in appearance and manner. So that when we do have a certain resistance to Monty Blue because he's not as sophisticated in his wit.
I must question one thing, just one thing. I think your analysis is perfectly sound, but I think you're being disingenuous when you say we. I mean, I identify the one person above. No, I don't identify with Adolphe Menjou, but the character that I adore is Marie Prevost. I mean, she is a comic gem. She is hilarious, and I wish her the best. I mean, she is honest. She goes after what she wants, and she does it in this very witty way. And I mean, when I say we, you and I, we really identify with the Europe. We're European of folks. That's amazing. When we're talking about it, the people in all the hick towns who didn't like Lubitsch movies, they are the ones who identify, I think, with the American couple, who are there to keep up the standards of morality and happy marriage and so on.
That comes back to what you were this notion of the film's metaphorical style. Because when you say this is Vienna, it's not Vienna, and it's also not America. The Vienna here is not an historical Vienna. It's a Vienna which is a metaphor of sophistication. It's where people who have sophisticated problems, the Vienna in this film is the place where people who have a sophisticated sensibility work out a new kind of set of marital problems that don't come up for less sophisticated people. And so it's where we can you can go to Vienna and experience this, but I don't think you get off the train station in Vienna and find this. I mean, you go into the theater and find this Vienna.
But you made that good comment before about the censors, I think.
Just to explain this, the film does sort of raise some interesting issues that would trouble an American audience. Certainly, all the adulterous.
Right.
It's Vienna because that's the city of Schnitzler, and the La Ronde is here in the marriage circle. Maryland censors actually insisted that all the kisses be cut between a wife and another man, which would actually truncate the film. But the small town America was, especially in the 20s, as they're sort of facing the age of the flapper, the new sexual morality, the F. Scott Fitzgerald generation, is very leery of this. And I think it was astute on Lubitsch's part to give a kind of solid moral base to this film of the happy couple who work out their problems without having to resort to detectives and divorce and so forth.
But apropos of that, I didn't remember the film, and I got it confused with something else. I sometimes forget the actual plot details when I haven't seen a film for a long time, and I wondered what happened to the Marie Prevost character. I thought at the end she ran off with some real aristocrat or something else. But then, in this version, he seems to be resuming the relationship. He's running
Creighton Hale.
Oh, is it Creighton Hale?
At the very end, yes. It's perfectly appropriate because she's been trying to break up the marriage by luring away Monty Blue, and Creighton Hale has also been making a play for Florence Fedor. So at the end, the circle's complete. The husband and wife are back together,
and he runs.
And he runs off after this vixen.
Yeah, but there is this circularity. Finally, it is achieved, and I think the sympathy that's established for the Marie Prevost character and the wit really overbalances the movie in a way. I mean, because to me the whole comic heart of the movie is when they go into that garden and she flings that thing, and he has the perfect camera angle. You know, the plano american. You know, he has it from the waist up so that you get the expression on her face, but you also get the unmistakable gesture. You know, he says, "Aren't you cold?" and he flings the thing. That is one of the funniest, wittiest things in the cinema up to that time.
She's consistently identified with theatricality. I mean, that's the greatest moment. Aren't you going to be a little cold? And she throws this away. But you remember earlier, when after she just met the doctor, she comes home and feigns this illness.
Oh, yes.
And then she even sets the stage by moving a chair as far across the room as she can, so we have to sit next to her on the sofa. And he immediately comes in and moves it away. And then she feigns suicide later on with this gun.
Yeah.
Which she then has to dispose of when her husband comes
back.
And
she has to push it under. But also the way it moves it moves across the frame, moves out of the frame. And you get this constant sense, this awareness of where the frame is. And that's, you know, nowadays you have a lot of directors who try to use these old gags, do old gags like this, and they always have the camera in the wrong place. You know, Lubitsch always had it in precisely the right place to get the maximum effect and clarity and lucidity for the gag. Now that is the art that he was, and he invented a lot of these devices, and he used them better, but they wouldn't work as well as they do for all the legerdemain and all the skill if he didn't establish the world that they occur in, and that's why you get this deliberate pacing. You have to build to them, and that's something I miss in movies today. You know, this
sense of rhythm.
Everything today is shock, jolt. You know, and nobody builds things up, builds a context so the thing will work. And that's what all the great comedians did have. That is the ability to build up to a gag, to build up a context for it.
Well, even somebody like Keaton, who uses a lot of climactic structures, as people will say, one of the great climactic sequences in American silent film in Steamboat Bill Jr., which will be, you know, even with him, the rhythm is it's slower at the beginning. There's an accumulation of detail so that the climax means something. The climax is not just.
Well, I think Steamboat Bill Jr. absolutely to praise a forthcoming film is probably it's my favorite Buster Keaton. I think it's one of his deepest, because one of the things that drives the gags forward is this fantastic feeling he has for his own father.
Right.
And he's played by his own father. And that feeling for the father, that emotional thing fuels the gags. It gives the gags this force and this romantic extension.
Well, that's we touched a little bit on this earlier, Annie, but that's where you know, Keaton and Lubitsch they're strange bedfellows, but they can be bedfellows because Keaton is the one who develops such beautifully designed stories so that the gags, as brilliant as they all may be, and as brilliantly executed as they may be, they always have this particular place in this very carefully structured story. So they're not just the gags of a clown.
No.
They issue both from character and from very well-developed story.
Well, people used to complain at the time that Keaton wasn't all that funny, and I think Keaton is not, to me that what gets me with Keaton always, as with Lubitsch, is the beauty of the art, and somehow beauty. You don't get the biggest guffaw. There's something low about belly laughs, you know, and I think Chaplin and Lloyd too got more belly laughs than Keaton. But Keaton, you have this perpetual smile, this charm of perfect, you know, architecture and artistry.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I think distinguishes Keaton from Lubitsch here is that, I mean, Keaton has this marvelous visual inventiveness, problem solving. Yeah. His gags always deliver their point rather efficiently.
Yes.
Lubitsch, on the other hand, constantly sets up gags through misunderstandings and different perceptions, so that the reactions, quite often, to what the characters are seeing are what's funny. Now, rather than having the comedy be, as I think it is in Keaton, partly based on our amazement at the action taking place. So that Lubitsch is someone who sort of turns around and plays with reactions. Like the last scene has to be one in which it builds on three different points of view. The husband who thinks his wife is is trying to scare him. The wife who's trying to scare her husband, and this innocent guy who's telling the truth. That he did kiss her and he'd come into the room. And it's a compounding of a comic moment because nobody understands anybody else except the viewer. This is the irony that Andy was talking about before. The Lubitsch is constantly keeping it.
Also, it's very ingenious plotting. The tactics, which are very, very intelligent. Usually, you have broad things, but here the cleverness with which she misleads the wife as to who the main threat is, and the switching of the cards, and everybody is being confounded by that patience to develop these elaborate stratagems, to keep the wife off the scent, and this kind of thing. This requires a kind of delicacy of perception, that nobody just goes bursting in, in a broad way and just say, I want your husband, that kind of thing. I mean, she wants to keep the friendship. She wants to. There's this taste for intrigue, which is the essence of it, and that's European. That's more European than American.
Well, we're going to have to end on this European note to this great American film because we've come to the end of our 30 minutes. If you'd like more information about Cinema Then, Cinema Now, or about cinema studies, graduate or undergraduate, drop us a line. Drop it to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the College of Staten Island, Staten Island, New York, 10301. Let me give you that information again, okay? Drop it to Cinema Then, Cinema Now, the College of Staten Island, New York, 10301. Well, this is an incredibly rich film in many ways. And Andy, I want to thank you in particular for bringing your knowledge of Lubitsch, the American cinema, and your appreciation of the sophisticated
thank you.
To us. John, always a pleasure having you here with your knowledge of cinema style, the careers of so many people.
And film sound.
Oh, and film sound. And film sound. We've got to have...
Glad I could bring that to bear on this film.
Absolutely. We'll have to come back to that subject sometime. Well, in any case, I hope that our discussion here of sound in the silent picture or whatever leads you to thought and discussion at home that you enjoy. Thanks for joining us.
Well, actually, a lot of